Good morning, everyone. Are you enjoying being here in Cancun? Say yes. I didn't hear you. Yes. Nice to see. By the way, I like people who sit in the front row. So anybody who sits in the front row will get a prize at the end of my presentation. So you have a chance now. Front row or not? Okay. You may regret this. Anyway, my name is Aris Papadopoulos, and I really enjoy these Ignite presentations. I did my first one in Sendai. I think it's a great communication medium. Plus, you get your presentation in YouTube that you can project to, larger audiences. And I'm going to be speaking about non-business private investment, basically homes. And a little bit about myself. I'm the founding chair of Resilience Action Fund, but really my career, 38-year career, has been in the construction industry. Not all of it, 25 in construction, 20 as CEO. And I semi-retired about a year and a half ago. I was one of the first business people to be involved with UNISDR back in 2010, and was the founding chair of the Private Sector Advisor Group, which today is called the UN Resilient Societies, Aris, let's call it. And if you're in business, please consider joining it. I think it's a great group, and we're networking around the world. And I also wrote a book on resilience and founded this nonprofit whose mission is to, it's based in the US and the UK, to advance awareness, transparency, and education for greater resilience in the built environment. And the programs we do evolve around communications, publications such as the publication I'll show you later, collaboration with major universities, funding and catalyzing some research projects and projects we do ourselves, and engagement with national and international organizations. And I'm going to talk about a study we did focused on housing. By the way, the book is available also in Spanish, and you can find it on buildingresilient.com. Oops. So, home. Home, for most people in the world, is the most important investment they'll make in their life. It's the center of their wealth. And when people lose their homes, they lose everything. It doesn't matter if the power plant's still there, or the water system's still there, or the bridge is still there. If you lose your home, you feel like you've lost everything. Unfortunately, the information shows that homes are the #1 category of natural disaster losses. And that's a big issue. The UN is showing us this curve of escalating economic losses. Well, the data shows that over 70, maybe 75% of these losses are residential. And that should be a big concern to us. That's why we engage in this study. Now, what are the different categories of housing? I mean, we have government-built housing. We have private developer-built housing that's for resale. I like to call that speculative housing. We have private developer-built housing that's for rent. Some of it, of course, is resold to somebody who then uses it for rent. And then we have owner-built housing. And depending where in the world you are, there's different percentages of these. Like in the developing world, there's still a high percent of owner-built housing. Whereas in the developed world, there's much more private developer-built. In fact, for example, in the US, 75% of the residential construction is speculative. And there's a certain percentage, I'd say it's higher, maybe in the former communist countries and so forth, of government-built housing. But our study shows that the most vulnerable of these categories is the private developer built for resale housing. And I'd also like to add that in the owner-built, the unplanned housing is a serious vulnerability. Now, it's not homogeneous reasons-wise. There are different reasons in different countries. I mean, there are countries without codes, a lot of them in Africa. And I heard from one of the countries yesterday asking for, can you give us codes that we can use? There are countries with codes, but with poor enforcement. A lot of them being in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And finally, there are countries with codes and with enforcement, but who set the standards too low. So they don't achieve the result. They all achieve the same result, let's say, And in fact, our study shows that the US is the #1 worst in economic home disaster losses because we set the codes too low. And this is a visual from the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, which is an insurance-funded group that created this testing facility just to show government that the houses that are built to code, and that's the one on the left, will not survive a normal windstorm. And they reinforced the house on the right there to be above code, creating a standard they call fortified. So why is this all happening? Codes generally are set at levels to allow people to escape, not to save the asset. And most of us don't know that when we buy a home or we move into a home. We think, oh, it's built to code, it has a permit, it must be safe. It's only safe enough to allow you to get out. It's not safe to stand. And unfortunately, governments are not readily willing to publicly admit that. You look at a lot of government reports, and I found in FEMA's reports at the far end, in small print, they say, this is the minimum. This is not, what you should be doing, it's the minimum. Well, in which part of our lives do we do the minimum? In our health, in our education, even in our clothing and other things? But in the most important part of our life, which is our home, we by default are brought to the minimum. And we don't know that. And finally, the property industry is generally silent on this subject. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want us to know, that this is really the minimum and we're vulnerable, because they want us to buy, right? Our study shows here something interesting, and this is a correlation of resilience on the vertical axis, higher meaning better, and the percent of built environment. And the point here is that our public facilities, our infrastructure, our institutional facilities like hospitals and universities and our large commercial are the more resilient part of our built environment. What's really the most vulnerable is the low-rise residential and the small commercial. And in fact, in my experience, over the last 50 years, that level has been going down. We have cheapened, in many ways, construction. You find homes that were built 50 years ago that are more resilient in many areas than those that were built 20 years ago. Why? Well, because we've made things thinner. We've cut costs, we've saved money. And we think we've taken out the margin of error. Other factors. Over the last half century, we're increasingly building on higher risk land sites. We've run out of the high ground. We're into the low ground. We're into the floodplains. We're filling in creeks. We're moving into riskier areas without changing our standards, applying the same standards that we use on the high ground. We talk a lot about affordability, and whenever you get into this discussion of standards, people say to you, well, we can't, we're going to not make them affordable. So, we say, okay, it's affordable. It may be vulnerable, but it's affordable. And we accept that. And especially the point that more profit is made in the building industry by building vulnerably, which means if I can keep my costs low, and if the consumer is not willing to recognize the value of that more resilient building, I can make more money. And finally, consumers have come to expect that the government will step in with aid. So why spend the money? The government will bail me out. What are the solutions? Five main solutions recommended here. First, greater consumer awareness, transparency, and education. We need to get the consumer more aware. They need to be more, most consumers do not even know the elevation of their home. An important fact. Less to know what year was built and compared to what was the code in that year. And the building industry, the realtors, they don't want to tell us that. Take the profit out of non-resilient construction. And there are different policies that can do that. Even insurance-wise, why are we subsidizing insurance for vulnerable construction? Strengthen codes, make resilience affordable instead of making risk affordable. In other words, let's set a level of a standard and say, how do we make that standard more affordable? And finally, more government spend on mitigation versus recovery. An interesting comment yesterday at the Build Back Better forum from the European Union was, for every $100 we spend on emergency, we spend $1.13, just a little over 1%, on mitigation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? Oh, yes? Any questions, please? You understood everything? It was clear? Thank you. You've been a great audience. Well, the front row gets a complimentary book. Thank you very much.